Because Goldstone is not only Jewish, but he's a self-declared Zionist. He says, I've worked for Israel all of my adult life. I fully support Israel's right to exist. I'm a firm believer in the absolute right of the Jewish people to have their home there. Mr. Goldstone sits in the board of governors of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He has an honorary doctorate from the Hebrew University. His mother was an activist in the Zionist movement. His daughter did Aliyah, Zionist emigration to Israel. Goldstone says, I became an international human rights lawyer because of the Nazi Holocaust. So now Israel had a big problem on its hands. For decades, it's honed these weapons to discredit any criticism of Israel. So if you criticize Israel, you have to be an anti-Semite or a self-hating Jew or a Holocaust denier. But now along came Mr. Goldstone and his personal and professional life. It neutralized Israel's most potent weapon to delegitimize criticism of it. Mr. Goldstone, he doesn't have your typical profile of an anti-Semite. He doesn't really seem much like a self-hating Jew. He says, I'm a Zionist, I love Israel. He's not your typical Holocaust denier. He says, it's because of the Holocaust that I became a human rights lawyer. So as the Israeli columnist Gideon Levy put it, this time the messenger, Mr. Goldstone, is propaganda-proof. And Israel was in a panic. Because if Goldstone was not an anti-Semite, if he was not a self-hating Jew, if he was not a Holocaust denier, if he was neither an incompetent nor a fool, and the only plausible explanation for the devastating content of his report was that it was true. And that brings us to the main consequence of the Goldstone report, or one of the main consequences, which is Goldstone is your typical classical Jew. He's a liberal. He believes in the rule of law. He believes in human rights. And it's become more and more difficult, if not impossible, for people who call themselves liberal, and Jews overwhelmingly call themselves liberal, to defend Israel's record, to defend Israel's conduct. 80% of American Jews voted for Obama. Even among Latinos, the percentage was about 67%. If you factor in income, Jews being by far and away the wealthiest ethnic group in the United States, they should be voting overwhelmingly Republican. Certainly more so than Latinos, but Jews are liberal. And being liberal means, in the current scene, believing in the rule of law, international organizations, human rights. Amnesty International is a liberal organization. Human Rights Watch is a liberal organization. And it's become more and more difficult, if not impossible, for those who call themselves liberal, meaning most American Jews, to support Israeli policy. And that's true across the board, not just among Jews. In the wake of the Gaza massacre and the wake of the Goldstone report, you can see there's been a serious decline. It's not yet precipitous, but it's a serious decline in support of Israeli policy and conduct. And that leaves us with the final point, that is, what should we do? And I think here we can take the wisdom of the Mahatma, Mr. Gandhi. I spent a lot of time this past year reading about him, or reading his collected works. He was, I think, not because of the Hollywood movie, which has nothing to do with the real Gandhi, but the real Gandhi was, in my opinion, he was a remarkable person, definitely worth reading and pondering. He called his doctrine of nonviolent resistance, he called it satyagraha. And satyagraha, be translated as hold on to the truth. Hold on to the truth. And that, I think, is our challenge, to hold on to the truth. That what Israel has done to the Palestinians is wrong, and it's indefensible. And to hold on to the truth that a diplomatic settlement of the conflict is within reach. But Israel's refusal, backed by the US, to respect international law is preventing that diplomatic settlement. If we learn how to wield the weapon of truth, as it's recorded in the findings of human rights organizations and the human rights community, and if we learn how to wield the weapon of justice, as it's embodied in the uncontroversial principles of international law. And that's why I liked what the first person who introduced me had to say. Our concern is pretty straightforward and simple. It's about the law, basic, uncontroversial principles of law. We want to see them implemented. If we learn how to wield the weapons of truth and justice and show a little fortitude, then a settlement of the Israel-Palestine conflict is within reach. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, give another round of applause for Mr. Norman Finkelstein. Okay, the next person I'm going to introduce is a hugely inspirational person who has personally inspired me greatly. He has spent the last 9 months of his life living in the occupied Palestinian territories. If you want to know more about this inspirational individual, please go to lifeonwheels.wordpress.com, which is his blog about his experiences. And I won't give away too much. I'll leave that to him because he's been through a lot. I personally wish I had 1% of the strength of this young man. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to give your ears and your minds to Jodie McIntyre.
Okay. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming to what I think is a very important event, and also to thank Dr. Finkelstein for that excellent speech. As Loki just said, for the last 9 months of my life, I've been with the people living under a brutal military occupation. From Palestinians in East Jerusalem being evicted from their homes to make way for foreign settlers, to Palestinians in the West Bank protesting non-violently